Good evening. Good evening. I have to tell you, it is always a special joy for me to be here at the 92nd Street Y. This is one of my favorite places in New York, and I thank you all for being part of an audience, a community that is really focused on bringing people together to have good conversations, to see wonderful cultural and artistic performances. We need that now more than ever. And so thank you for being friends of the 92nd Street Y as well. I could not think of a more opportune moment to discuss the subject of Melissa's book and the ramifications of her own story, along with the many challenges that we are confronting in our country today when it comes to all sorts of issues of equality and justice for so many Americans. And so I want to dive right in and begin by just acknowledging that I've known Melissa a long time. I feel very fortunate for that. She and I both went to Wellesley College. Admittedly, I was before her. But she is an award-winning journalist, and she wrote for all kinds of publications, most particularly, as we'll get into it, Sports Illustrated, but also she was involved in broadcast television, and her real beginning commitment in journalism was to covering sports. We're going to talk about her most recent book, Locker Room Talk, A Woman's Struggle to Get Inside, which chronicles her groundbreaking 1978 federal legal case, in which the judge, and we'll also talk about the judge because the judge was also a gutsy woman, Judge Constance Baker Motley, the first black woman to become a federal judge in our country. And after the trial, the judge ordered the commissioner at the time, Bowie Kuhn, to provide equal access for women sports writers so they could work alongside their peers in the locker room, which was quite groundbreaking to say the least. It's also important to note that she has two other books, one called On Our Own, Unmarried Motherhood in America, and Touching Home in China in Search of Missing Girlhood, because years ago, she was one of the pioneer single women to adopt a child from China. So she has a very exciting and challenging professional and personal life. And I think we should start by acknowledging, Melissa, that we're at a time in our country where a lot of the progress women have made looks to be precarious. It looks to be under assault. Women leaders in the military, women leaders in the federal government, women leaders in corporations, women leaders in entertainment. I mean, across the board, you're seeing women leaders fired. You're seeing them not hired. You're seeing the idea that we want a diverse workforce that reflects our entire population basically attacked and undermined. So there's a kind of deja vu all over again kind of feeling here, and it's, in my view, exacerbated by what happens online, where there's so much viral attacks on women. But let's start with the book and with your story, because you were a pioneer, you were a groundbreaker, and you were a gutsy woman when you took on Major League Baseball.
Well, coming from you, both as who you are, as a longtime friend of both myself and Maya, for which I am very grateful, but also the author with your daughter of the book of Gutsy Women.
Right.
I take that as a wonderful compliment, and thank you very much for your years of friendship and for what you've just said. You're right, where we are in deja vu land here. And I think an important place to start maybe this whole conversation is to think about, I'm going to talk a little bit about my court case, but really my case as the case with women today, is argued not only in the courts, and also sometimes at the ballot box, sometimes on social media, but it's certainly argued in what I'd call the court of public opinion. And that court of public opinion is often shaped by the stereotypic ideas that we have of women's place. If you look at the book that's recently been a bestseller written called Erased, about the American patriarchy by Anna Tubbs, she really takes us back and says that we have to start really examining the roots of this, taking us all the way back to our founding. And I was reminded this week when someone mentioned, we often hear about Abigail Adams writing Remember the Ladies way back when. Well, it turns out that her husband, John Adams, wrote a letter to her, and he happened to write it on April 14th of 1776. April 14th was the day of my hearing in 1978. So that date stuck in my mind. But when she pleaded with him to remember the ladies, his response to her, which I'd never known before, you maybe know it, he wrote, "I cannot but laugh." And then I think about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who set up literally her work from 1970 to 1976, when she made it her job to really try to advance gender through the Equal Protection Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. And I think about her a lot because when you think about John Adams not being able to restrain a sense of laughter at that moment, that's what judges did with her, literally from the Supreme Court. They laughed at her because she was bringing forward women to make an argument that they should be treated with equal protection. It was only, and I repeat only, when she beat them at their own game by bringing in male plaintiffs and making the convincing argument that they were being treated unfairly. And it is somewhat ironic that the final case that ended up deciding that, which was a case involving David Boren, was about the purchase of near beer by college students, and the complaint that men had to wait till they were 21 and women could do it when they were 18. But that case became what became the precedent in the Supreme Court for moving gender to an intermediate scrutiny. Race has always been the highest scrutiny because that amendment came in, of course, after the Civil War. But to bring gender to that point was quite something, but we cannot forget what she went through to do that. So just to touch on my case a little.
Yeah, because I want to hear what you went through.
Then we'll move forward. So in the case of public opinion, I lost.
Well, give a little background.
I'll give a little background.
Yeah.
I'll give a little background. Okay, we're at Game 1, 1977 World Series.
And who were you working for at the
I
time?
was working for Sports Illustrated, the world's largest and most widely read magazine in the world at that point
time.
in
That's
sports.
right.
And I was the beat reporter for Sports Illustrated for baseball, which was a rather big deal because there was no other woman covering baseball, with the exception of the woman I had replaced, who had gone out to California to work for a newspaper, Stephanie Salter. And so we get to Game 1 of the 1977 World Series, and I just want to set the stage a little bit. I'd been covering baseball for 2 years, and I was probably the first woman who didn't leave. You know, the men did everything they could to make it as uncomfortable as it could for you so that you would leave, and most times women had left, but I stuck around. I can't say it was always easy, but I was so passionate about this.
You loved baseball.
I love baseball.
Let's just make it clear.
You know,
you were a baseball fan.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And it was my mother. It was my mother, and it was through literally her DNA. When my grandfather writes a letter to her, she's given birth to me in Iowa, her first child, and he writes a letter in which he spells my name wrong and says, "I'll be a sweet girl." He's assured of that. But immediately, he leaves the subject of me aside, and he moves right to what else? The Yankees-Red Sox. Had just played a 3-game series in Boston, and for my mother, who, of course, in those days, 1951, had no access to newspapers, she's flat on her back because she'd been given spinal anesthesia, and they forgot to tell her not to sit up. So she's got a terrible headache. The letter arrives, and he does a whole account, rat-a-tat-tat, of the games. And so when I found that letter, she had died when I was in the process of writing this book. I find that letter and I go, that explains it.
From birth, you were destined for baseball.
I had the DNA. So yes, so I stuck around. Now, why is that important? Because here's why women left before me. I didn't know this then, but I've learned the history. They left because they were told, we are not allowing you to sit in the press box. Now, just as an aside, put this in parentheses, there is no man who covered the story while naked. Just think about that, okay? Just keep that in the back of your mind. Okay. Then there were other women who came along. They said, you can't not only go in the press box, but you can't go on the field for batting practice. Now, the players are in their uniforms then, and no man standing at the batting cage was naked. We don't have to do this again, okay? Now, the kicker is that Diane Shaw in 1972 wants to come to my beloved Fenway Park. And she calls the PR guy and he says, you can come, but we're going to put you in the grandstand. You can't go on the field and you can't sit in the press box. And so she gets her male attorney for the magazine and the male editor. They call and they say, okay, she can sit in the press box and she can go on the field. Now, why wouldn't these two men, the editor and the lawyer, ever think about asking whether she could eat with the other sports writers? Must have slipped their mind. She gets there. They walk her up to where the dining room is. She begins to go in. They say, no, you can't go in. We have a table set up for you. They had a picnic table. They had a sign saying Ladies Pavilion. She was supposed to eat her meal by herself. Now, remember the parentheses. I don't have to repeat it. Okay, so these are all the reasons that women basically said, I don't even want to be around this anymore. So I get there. God help me, I'm asking for access to do the job, be where the men are doing the job, and a fairness issue, and it now involves the clubhouse. But by now, I can be in the press box, I can be on the field, and I can eat with the men. That's progress. I should also say that my prior person in my job, Stephanie Salter, had gotten tossed out of the baseball's annual dinner in February because she tried to wear a tuxedo like a dress, but they said, no women involved. So we have this. So I'm going to just say to you here, for all of you who have thought through the years, if you've ever thought about this case or heard about it, that it was about nudity. It wasn't. Okay? It wasn't. It was about the exclusion of women. It was about wanting to push me away. Why they feared me so much, I don't know. But there's an inkling of this in Diane Shaw's interview that she did with Roger Angell for The New Yorker. And she is in the press box, she's sitting there, and she goes over to talk to the man who had refused her the access to the field and the rest, and she says, Bill, it looks like it's going okay. And he said, I don't think so. And she said, what's the problem? He said, tomorrow there's going to be 50 of you here trying to get at my players. And she walked away with this bubble over her head saying, there aren't even 50 of us who are covering this sport in the whole world. So there was this fear that one woman, and you've been there.
Yeah, after me, the deluge, right?
What I'm saying to you, you know, and that is one woman can set off such a cascade of fear about if she gets into the boys' club. Remember those boys' clubs that used to be up in trees, and if the girl came by, they pulled the ladder up? That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to pull the ladder up. And so it was really, it wasn't about nudity. They were telling me that I could not be in the clubhouse for the time that I wanted to be, actually, which wasn't after the game. Remember, I was working for a magazine. The time I wanted to be in there was before the game for 45 minutes. When there is no concern about how the game went, you're able to really sit down, talk with the players, have the kind of conversations that I needed to have for a magazine. And not one player was without his uniform. So I will end this by saying that Bowie Kuhn kept repeating and repeating that even though the players on both teams had said, yes, we understand she has a job to do, she's here, Bowie Kuhn in baseball contended that he was protecting the players' sexual privacy. Now, what he meant by that, was never defined. It was never defined. But anyway, so
Did they physically stop you from going into the clubhouse at Game 1 World Series?
Well, Game 1 World Series, no. They called me to the main press box. I was in the alternate press box down because there's always an overwhelming amount of press there. So I was down in that. Our writer was in the main press box. And they called me up in the 5th inning, and they announced to me that it didn't matter that the Dodgers had actually taken a vote to say that they were fine with me doing my job, essentially, going in the clubhouse. Didn't matter that there was only one person in baseball, one authority, and as we know, he was sort of godlike. He had the best interests of baseball in mind. He was the commissioner. He could rule anything he wanted to rule in the best interests. And so I was told in the 5th inning that the commissioner, it didn't matter if permission had been granted by the Yankees, because I'd been in their locker room during the American League Championship Series, and no one thought that was a big story to write about, because I'd been a gradualist. You know, I kind of had just been around so long, maybe people didn't even notice I was there. But in the 5th inning, it was made clear that I wouldn't be allowed anywhere near the clubhouses, and any of the guards would be told that I could not go in. So that was going to exist through the World Series, and then they added the little word, "and forever."
And forever.
And, you know, Commissioner Kuhn was young at the time, so forever was going to stretch for quite a while.
So how did you make the decision to sue? Because that's not an easy decision. You know, it's one thing to be literally prevented from doing your job, to be, in effect, sidelined when all your male counterparts are doing what they need to do to report back about the player in the games. So they basically stopped you. The commissioner stopped you. And then how did you decide about actually suing them?
Well, you're assuming that I had agency in this.
Okay.
Okay? Which is probably not the correct assumption, so let me try to just make it a sort of summary here. I thought so little of what had happened to me on Monday night. It was so customary for me to be told what I couldn't do that I did not think it was news. Okay? It wasn't news to me.
Yeah, it's the same old
thing. You know, it was that was Tuesday night. We had Tuesday and Wednesday off, and we worked on weekends. Obviously, we were working 7 days a week during the series. But I did not think it even ranked up there to call my editor to tell him what happened. I'd been negotiating all of this on my own. No man had ever said back at the office, "Are you having a tough time doing this job? You know, is anything we can help you with?" So, you know, I'm a lone ranger. And so this was not at all new to me. So I said nothing, and I get in on Thursday morning when our work week starts, phone rings. It's Peter Carey, who's my editor. He said, "Get down here." I said, "Okay." So I show up in his office. He said, "What the hell is happening at the stadium?" You know, Jane called me. Jane is a woman who used to work at SI and had gone on to cover basketball. Anyway, Jane had called and said, "I don't know what's going on, but something's going on with Melissa at the stadium." So Peter asked me, I told him. And he went to the managing editor after I told him, and the managing editor looked at him and said, "Whatever you need to do, you do." And so they began negotiating with the commissioner, hoping that they could find a solution. I had worked under the radar the whole time, never going public with my demands, and that's why I had the access I did.
Right.
Because I didn't.
I think that's an important point. You were not the one picking the dust up.
Exactly. And I knew that that wasn't never going to be the way that it was going to happen. When you're one woman, as you know, in a sea of men, you are really having to strategize. You don't demand anything. You strategize and work at it, and you show your worth, and you prove yourself, and all of this. And so it was at the end of the season that literally the Yankees left me a press pass for the clubhouse. I went to the PR guy. I said, "What? Did you mean to do this?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "You've proven yourself. Yeah, you know, you'll use it smartly. Whatever you want to do, it's yours." And that was the last 2 games of the 77 thing, and then the American League Championship. So, you know, really the larger point was that I didn't see this as news. But anyway, they negotiated. It was like it just kept going around and around. The commissioner thought that separate accommodations was equal access.
Separate but equal, I heard that.
Separate but equal, you've heard that. You know, we're going to get to that in a minute with my judge. But yeah, separate but equal was going to work out. So I'll tell you just briefly what separate but equal looked like after Game 6 of that series. By then they had met with the commissioner, and I was never consulted about my ideas about what should work. The men just went and talked about me, and then they called me and told me what I was going to do. And what I was going to do was to meet my male escort. It's the first and last time I've ever had a male escort. So I was to meet him. He was a PR guy for the Phillies after the game. Now, this was game 6.
Okay.
Anyone in New York, and we're all in New York here tonight, knows that in the 6th game, Reggie Jackson hit 3 home runs and brought the World Championship back to New York that fall. And so the Yankees won. So obviously, I was at the Yankees locker room. And here's the idea. The male escort, my male escort, was supposed to meet me. And Bowie Kuhn's separate accommodation, it turned out, was my back against a cement wall, being pushed and pushed into the wall by the fans who'd come in the tunnel. I had a front row seat, being able to watch every man who did not have a credential as I did, that said I had access to the clubhouse, be able to parade in as they walked by me. Now, the cacophony that was bouncing off those walls, had my male escort during that hour and 45 minutes that I stood there managed to bring out a player for me to talk to who had played in the game. He brought 2 players out who had never played in the game. I couldn't hear them, they couldn't hear me. That was his separate accommodation. That was separate but equal. So that was, in a sense, a proving ground for the fact that this concept of his was dead on arrival. And so it was in November that they actually came to me and asked me if I would be the plaintiff in this case. And you know what, Hillary? I said yes right away. And you know why? Because I was so naive that from my perspective, inside who I was, this was all about me working and wanting to do my job.
Yeah.
All I wanted was a chance to do my job.
Right. A job you loved.
A job I loved, and I just couldn't believe I got it. And here I was going to hold on to it as much as I could. But here's what happened. If I had known when I said yes what was going to happen to, and I'll take your phrase, a gutsy woman who put herself out there with her name in the press, and if I had known what was going to come back to me, the backlash against me, I will tell you that in the year of world coverage of my case, there are certain words that never appeared in stories. Women's rights, equal rights, or the phrase, she wants to do her job. In the court of public opinion, it was about sexually objectifying me. It was about a virtue test, a morals test of who I was as a woman. And if I was truly a lady, which they like to call me, or a damsel.
A damsel?
Damsel was big. Damsel was big. If I was...
I don't think I've ever been called a damsel.
Well,
I think I missed out.
Well, damsel they did, Gal Fridays, I mean, all sorts of things. But, you know, and the sexual objectification, of course. But, you know, never in all of that coverage was there any concern about the fact that I might not be able to do this job that I was certainly capable of doing. I'd written baseball columns for then. I was capable. My employer sent me there because they knew I was capable of doing the job. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't advance. I couldn't do it. So I think we might turn to Constance Baker Motley because that's the other court, the court of law.
Right.
And that was a very, very different place for this case to be played out. And I want to say before we get inside the courtroom with Constance Baker Motley, who's one of your gutsy women in the book of Gutsy Women,
right.
and I thank you for getting her there because she certainly deserves it, and you'll tell us why in just a second. But before we do that, I want to tell you who was not in the courtroom that day. Not one of the writers who spilled gallons of ink talking about my morals, talking about the men's sexual privacy, talking about all the things of objectification, all the demeaning, all of this about me, to the point where I didn't recognize who I was in this coverage. None of them showed up for a hearing which all of them could have been at which was the essence of what I was doing.
You know, Melissa, your story is sadly a somewhat common, universal story because the court of public opinion has always been very harsh, and particularly harsh on women who poke their head above the rampart. I mean, it's also harsh on men, but there's a special, almost perverse, sadistic delight that, you know, the press takes in going after women and tearing them down. And it's always struck me as quite significant that I think what we just heard you say is that you were badly used in the court of public opinion. But once you got into a real court
That's right.
with, you know, rules of evidence and legal standards, some of you may be thinking that's what is happening in America today. We have court cases that are being won in the court, not being enforced or being postponed and being put on, you know, the back burner, while the battle is fought out in the court of public opinion. Absolutely. Where you can say anything, you don't have to be factually accurate, you don't have to meet the rules of either evidence. You know, I did practice law for a time. I am a recovering lawyer, and a long time ago, I practiced law, and there's this old saying, you know, if the law is not on your side, you know, emphasize the facts, and if the facts aren't on your side, emphasize the law. And if you don't have either the law or the facts, just beat the table and yell. And so part of what happens in the court of public opinion is a lot of yelling. And now with the internet, a lot of anonymous attacking. But once you get into a real court, you at least have a fighting chance.
That's right.
You have your case to present. And Constance Baker Motley was an extraordinary lawyer who was one of the, great civil rights lawyers, along with Thurgood Marshall. And, you know, she was on the team, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund team that brought some of the most important early cases, including Brown v. Board of Education, to try to finally use the law, the very words of the Constitution, to create a pathway toward greater justice and equality. And she had a storied legal career.
That's right.
As a litigator and as an excellent legal analyst. She grew up in New Haven, not far, obviously, from here. And then Lyndon Johnson put her on the federal court. I think it was Lyndon, or was it Kennedy?
No. Lyndon Kennedy had put Thurgood Marshall in, and the Solicitor General, and then appellate court. And the interesting story is, excuse me, just one sec.
Tell me.
And I learned this, obviously, when I did my book. I didn't know this about her when I'm sitting in front of her as a 26-year-old, girl. I just had no idea.
Right.
Okay. But it's like, wow, when you learn it. Johnson wanted to put her on the appellate court. That's where she deserved to be.
Right.
She took 10 cases to the Supreme Court. She won 9 of them outright, and 10 the Supreme Court changed their mind. So she won 10. He wanted her to be on the appellate court. Here's what happens. She got James Meredith into the University of Mississippi, the flagship university. That was one of the toughest cases ever. Thurgood Marshall came in and gave the letter that James Meredith had written to Connie. He said, Connie, here, this will never happen. You take this one. Well, what did you take this one mean? It meant that she had to spend a long, long time in Jackson, Mississippi in that courthouse. Let's just think about it for a minute when we talk about gutsy women. Thurgood Marshall later said that he did not send himself or other men because he feared if they went, they would be assassinated.
Right.
She stayed in the home of Medgar Evers. When she stayed there, they had men on the roof with rifles. But we all know that Medgar Evers was assassinated in front of his house. When she went to the courthouse, in that courthouse, she could not use the bathrooms. She could not use the telephone. So at least 2 or 3 times a day, she had to leave that courthouse and walk several blocks. And every time she did that, people screamed at her, people demeaned her, people held up signs against her because she had obviously was threatening them, not only as a black woman coming to do this, but she was going to destroy their way of life, Jim Crow. So this is a woman who Ketanji Brown Jackson said when she was nominated, had it not been for her era, she would have been the first black woman to sit on the Supreme Court. But I want to say that the reason she didn't make the appellate court and the reason that Johnson backslid and put her on the mother court of our country, which is the Southern District Court, is because James Eastland, the segregationist from Mississippi, was the chair of the Judiciary Committee. And James Eastland told Johnson, over my dead body, and it's not going to happen ever.
Well, it was also that Thurgood Marshall was being nominated as well, right?
Not that same year.
Not the same year, but that was something that was, you know.
Yeah, but James Eastland was a
appellate
huge
court,
block. And so Johnson said, okay, well, I'll put her on the Southern District Court.
Right.
And just by the way, that court had done very well in 1789 when it was founded as the mother court. When she arrived in 1966, they'd gone 177 years without having a woman on that court. And by 1977 and 78, when my case gets there, well, that had gone up to 189 years because she was still the only woman on that court.
Right.
And they spun a wheel, and the clerk put his hand in the wheel and pulled out her name of all of the judges on that court.
But you could not have had a better judge to hear your case, in part because how steep she was in the law. And remember, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, one of the tactics that was deployed to defeat it was adding the word sex. No discrimination on the basis of race, national origin, religion.
Yep.
And then one of the opponents of the Civil Rights Act decided he was going to last-ditch, absolutely torpedo it by adding sex.
Right.
And it didn't, thankfully. So the Civil Rights Act gets passed, and you draw the judge who knows probably more about the law and the Constitution, and now has the 1964 Act as well as the 14th Amendment. And
Absolutely.
So you could not have picked a better qualified, more experienced judge if you had tried, and it was all by chance, just by picking it out of the wheel.
Totally by chance, but I just want to put a little sort of parentheses on this one, too. It's not about nudity this time. But by the way, my lawyer did go and try to figure out F.A.O. Schwartz Jr., a fabulous attorney.
He was a great lawyer.
Unbelievable lawyer.
Yes.
But he did go and talk with many of her friends in the legal circles to find out that she was, quote unquote, a bit of a prude. And that did play a part in his strategy within the hearing.
Nudity talked about in
That's
the court.
right. That's right. So we do have that bit. But, Constance Baker Motley, when she sat on a bench, she took over that courtroom. She was so dignified, so there. She focused all attention. And I think we were sort of lucky in a sense that baseball argued its case that it argued in the court of public opinion in the court of law. And she had wanted nothing to do with it. I will say that you are exactly right in saying that it could not have been a more perfect fit. And the following reason. You mentioned that she was with the NAACP LDF, and it was always the policy that if a case went to the Supreme Court, there was always a co-counsel from the NAACP. So when Fritz Schwartz is arguing my case, he's about 4 minutes into it, I'm sitting in the courtroom, and he gets into this case and he says, Judge, I'm going to really spend time during this case in making the argument that the Supreme Court precedent in Burton v. Wilmington Parking Authority is really in play in this case. And I'm nudging the person next to me. I said, parking garage? What the hell does that have to do with baseball? I mean, I had no idea what he was talking about. And so he introduces this, and he says, I'd like to explain. She says, Mr. Schwartz, please continue. I think I know something about that case. She was the co-counsel on that case before the Supreme Court of Burton v. Wilmington Parking. So let me just give you quick. State action, very, very important because baseball is a private entity. You cannot sue a private entity through the 14th Amendment and have that hold. So you have to build a bridge that's called state action in order to have the judge agree that she will rule based on the 14th Amendment. How does he do that? He turns to Burton, settled in 1961. Burton was a black man. He goes into a restaurant. They refuse to serve him, the Eagle Coffee Shop. The Eagle Coffee Shop happens to be in the corner of the Wilmington Parking Authority garage, which is public.
Right.
Okay, and they have a 30-year lease with the city. All right, so now imagine this. So substitute Burton for Melissa. Woman wants to go into clubhouse. It's in a private, that's the Yankees area, but it's in Yankee Stadium, where for $50 million was just spent 2 years from city taxpayers to refurbish the stadium, and they now have a 30-year lease. Isn't that coincidental? So the precedent is an exact fit. And so when you read, if you read my book, it really takes place in the 2.5 hours of this hearing. And she keeps saying to baseball, just help me understand why you don't think Burton applies. And they just can't do it. They keep going back to nudity. This will ruin baseball. I mean, if she's in there, it will ruin centuries of tradition. And, all she wants them to do is address why would Burton not apply.
What's the legal issue?
Exactly.
Not the court of public opinion, but the court of law.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it.
Well, it's such a great story because there are so many lessons that we can still, take from it in terms of what it costs you to have your case litigated, so to speak, in the court of public opinion, but what it meant to get into a real court with an experienced expert judge who could make the analogies, who could ask the hard questions, who could really demand that the defendant justify their action.
Right.
And based on both precedent and, I would argue, the additional meaning imputed to the 14th Amendment, because it's not just that $50 million went. As I recall, the United States Congress had a few things to say about Major League Baseball. So
That's right.
They clearly thought they could legislate about this, quote, private business because of its, standing in our country. But it's great to link your story, because, yes, you were gutsy and you did take them on, but also then Constance Baker Motley. But you also have a story about Shirley Chisholm.
Oh, my God. Well,
And she's also in the book of Gutsy Women.
I know.
And, she's somebody who I find, the more I learn about her, and I've studied her, the more admiring I am. And the latest thing that I was reminded of, especially in this time of polarization, divisiveness, a lot of hateful things being said, cruelty, all of that we see going on. After George Wallace was shot, Shirley Chisholm visited him. Think about that.
I do.
And how just striking that is even today. But in 1968, I guess, when that happened, during the presidential primaries, when he was actually running, for Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman elected
That's right. Congress.
To the United States Congress, to go visit someone who was not only a segregationist from the past, but running on a very pro-segregation, anti-civil rights platform, and winning states in the North.
That's right.
Not just in the South. For her to go visit him in the hospital just spoke volumes to me.
Yeah, well, you write in the book, and I can hear your voice in it.
Yeah.
I kind of know what Chelsea writes and what you write. It's a wonderful kind of different generational views on these women.
I lived through a lot more than she did.
No, I know. But I assure you, I bought 5 copies of it that have gone to all my nieces and my daughter. So, it's a fabulous, fabulous book. But when I read the one about Shirley, I made the connection that, you and I make sometimes in our own lives about our Wellesley experiences. They didn't coincide, but certainly they were, one after the other. And it was that period of time of revolution, of rebellion, of you describing at your graduation in your speech, that protest and dissent is part of the American character.
Right.
I mean, that was a gutsy thing to say then, particularly right after my Senator Brooke, spoke. But you know, you introduced Shirley Chisholm as someone you came to know while you were a student at Wellesley, and you were, you know, involved in government there, and the respect that you had for her. And I don't think that it's not coincidental that our class that comes in right when yours leaves, you leave in '69 in the spring, and I arrive in the fall of '69. And what I arrive in is the class that you all had fought for. And that was a class that more than any other class had well over 60, it seemed a lot at that time, of African American women. They had gone around the country to recruit the best women and try to convince them to come to this school that many of them would not have had on their radar screen. So above and beyond all the seven sisters at that point, our class is really known for that. And so at the end of it, when it's time for our commencement, Shirley Chisholm is our commencement speaker, which I thought was incredibly fitting and just wonderful. And I know I could look out at this audience and say, how many of you actually remember what your college commencement speaker said on the day that you left college? But not only did I remember it, but I went to look it back up at the Boston Globe, reported it, et cetera. It was a big deal. And in summary, she said, she looked down, she was a small woman.
Yes.
But her voice was powerful. Her spectacles were sort of almost bigger than her face. And she looked down at our class, and she talked about being involved in the two major movements of our day, which was the civil rights movement and the women's movement. And she closed out by looking down at us, and she said, if I can do this as a black woman, and she stared at us, and she said, you, as highly educated white women, can get involved in both of these movements.
That's right.
And she left me that day just like fired up. Fired up.
Yeah, yeah.
But then the summer came, and I didn't apply for any jobs. I mean, it was just horrible. I was not in a good place. And I don't know, it kind of left me this, but it never left me the words. I was sort of still trying to figure out, how do I ever, fit in what she just commanded us to do?
Which she kind of challenged you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be challenged.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to be challenged. So I loved it. So then, one afternoon, my family grew up in Summers in Hyannisport, and I decided I had nothing else to do, take a walk to the pier. And so I'm taking a walk, and it turns out that the sailboat that Ethel Kennedy is sailing at the time is having a little bit of rough time, let's say, put it gingerly. And so I go in the water and try to help turn them around. And she kind of waves at me. I'd grown up with all of her kids. And she says, 6:30, dinner. I said, okay, all right, go over for dinner, 6:30. That night, my life changed. That was the pivot point. Sometimes I say to young people today, when they ask about how does a career happen, how do things happen, I say, it's knowing the serendipitous moment. Because I think a lot of them happen in our lives all the time. They're sprinkled around, but we don't often know it's that moment. Mm-hmm. That night for me, I sat across the dinner table from Frank Gifford, who was at that time the broadcaster for ABC. He'd become one of the trio on Monday Night Football. He had just been at the Olympics in Munich the year before in '72. And across the table, as though no one else was there were maybe 10 or 12 people at the table, we just talked sports. And at the end of it, now I was 21 at the time, 22, he said at the end, great compliment, he said, for a girl, you know a lot about sports. I'm beaming, and then as we're walking to get coffee in the living room, he turned to me and he said, if you come to New York, or when you come to New York, I think he said, when you come to New York, as though I'd ever been to New York, which I hadn't, he said, I want to introduce you to all the people at ABC Sports. And so a week after the Battle of the Sexes.
Oh, the Billie Jean King.
Billie Jean King, another gutsy woman in your book. See, we're going to get all of them by the time we finish here. Billie Jean King, yep. I get to New York the week after. Frank, a man of his word, at the elevator, shows me around, takes me into all the offices that have great grand windows of Manhattan. Mm-hmm. Now, we know who's in those offices, right. All men.
Right.
Okay. They're looking out, the sun is shining, it's beautiful, Manhattan is below them, and they're very powerful. And then And then what happens? He has to go back to do the local sports over at WABC. So we're walking out, and he suddenly looks in this corner office, no windows, one fluorescent light. And under that light is sitting the only woman producer at ABC Sports. He says, well, hey, Melissa, this is Ellie Rieger. Why don't you go hang out with her, and I'll go do my thing. And, you know, Ellie, this is Melissa, whatever. Ellie became my mentor. Ellie said to me that day after we talked for about 15, 20 minutes, she said, why don't you stick around a couple days? She said, I'm working on a Women in Sports. You know, we're doing Title IX, we're doing Battle of the Sexes, the whole thing. Title IX, by the way, your Gutsy women are the 3 women involved in Title IX. I think we're going to hit them all.
Yes.
And so she says, and so when someone says that, another serendipitous moment, I said, of course, I'll stay. And so for the next 2 or 3 days, I went to their little studio. She had an all-women's crew. And that second day that I'm there, up the stairs walks Billie Jean King.
Oh.
And at that moment, I said, this is what I've been meant to do. This is my life. There was no pathway. I mean, I had a resume that basically had waitress at Dunkin' Donuts on it.
But you did graduate from Wellesley.
Well, I graduated from Wellesley, but with an art history degree. And never worked on the college newspaper. So I didn't have a lot going for me. But it's in the book what happens after the introduction to Frank. I do move to New York. I move in with one of the women who'd been on Ellie Rieger's crew that day. She holds the keys to the kingdom, which is all of the monthly places where ABC Sports will be and all of the video sessions. And so I hang around. I did not know the word for it, but you know what I was doing? I was networking.
Yeah.
And I ended up at Sports Illustrated.
Yeah.
All right, we have some questions.
Good, excellent.
All right, so I'm going to start with one for you. There are a couple that say Melissa, and yeah, I'm going to start with you. I haven't even read it, but here we go. You have a history of being able to work across the aisle as First Lady, Senator, and then they have the word et cetera. So that's all that you've done after that.
That's great.
So here's an easy question. You ready?
I'm ready.
This is what we used to call a softball. How do we return to civil dialogue? In politics and society.
Oh, boy.
And you have 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
No, I'm joking.
Well, I think we start by honestly recognizing what we've lost. You know, when I was so privileged to represent New York in the Senate for 8 years, I partnered with practically every Republican senator on something. And if we had not had bipartisan support, it would have been really difficult after 9/11 to get the money that we needed to rebuild New York, to take care of the families who had lost loved ones in the attack, and so much else. So we found ways of working together. We worked together on legislation. We worked together in committees. That didn't mean we agreed on everything, but we tried as best we could to find common ground. And that has diminished to the point of, you know, totally missing, certainly in the House, and to some extent even in the Senate, where it is much harder to find that common ground, to work across the aisle, and in part because you're often penalized by people on the ends of both of your parties for working to compromise, find some principled compromise with someone on the other side of an issue. So neither the left or the right wants to see that. They want much more purity. They want you to, you know, not be a legislator. They want you to be an advocate. And so we've lost the kind of understanding of what it takes in a democracy for democratically elected bodies, the Congress, for the example, to actually get things done and to try to help as many people as possible, solve as many problems. So I think we have to go back to talking about what we've lost, and we have to also try to model that as much as possible in as many different settings, not just in Congress, but in our civic lives, our business lives, our professional lives, our community lives, like here at the 92nd Street Y. And I think that requires people to stand firmly in favor of trying to bring people together and frankly sort of not being overly influenced by the purists who don't want you to find any common ground. Now, that's made more difficult in today's world because of social media.
Absolutely.
Which rewards extremism, rewards the loudest voices, rewards through its algorithms going down rabbit holes and finding yourself in a place where everybody agrees with you and you don't have to even entertain a difference of opinion. So this is a very important question, and I think each of us has to look for ways that perhaps we can try to reach across to somebody, we can model something. You know, when Tom Kaplan introduced us, you know, he and I have talked a lot about that at Columbia, where I teach a course at the School of International and Public Affairs. And we started, the dean and I, she was here with me some weeks back when we were talking about our work. We started something called the Institute of Global Politics, and we've tried to bring people together across lines, not just geographic lines, but also in our own country, partisan lines. Because if we don't start somewhere, we're not going to get anywhere. I guess that's a simplistic way of saying it. So, for example, Mike Pompeo, who was, you know, the second of Trump's first-term secretaries of state, is one of our fellows. He's taught a course there. He and I are doing an event, what we call across the aisle events at Columbia, at SEPA. And then we also have Mary Kay Henry, who is the former head of the SEIU union, and what is her view on things. So we are in our own little corner of the world, and you know, obviously higher education is under so much pressure these days on everything. We have to kind of model that behavior in every setting we can find, and hopefully, you know, people will be tired of the extremes. They'll be tired of chasing, you know, rabbits down rabbit holes on social media, tired of being manipulated by algorithms and being told what to think, whether there's any factual and evidentiary basis or not. So we have to rebuild all of that.
Well, we better start now.
Yeah, we better start now.
Yeah. Well, this one is for both of us, and you can decide whether you want to go first or second.
Okay.
It says, you're both trailblazers in politics and sports. What advice do you have for young women who want to follow your footsteps?
You should start.
I should start?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm going to start, and I'm very serious about this because, you know, I go to journalism classes all the time, and I, you know, always give people my email, and if they want to be mentored, I'm very happy to do that because, you know, one advantage of being old is really wanting to give back. That's just something that happens to you. You cross a threshold and you just want to give back. And so inevitably, you know, there will be someone who will raise their hand and say, well, how do I get a job in sports, you know, journalism? It's very hard today because journalism has imploded and, you know, it's just tough. So I'd say buy a stamp.
Buy a stamp?
Buy a stamp. That's what I tell them. I ask them to show of hands how many of them have recently, or any time recently, been to a post office. The answer, none, zero. And then I say, well, how thrilled are you when you go to your little post office box that you might check every once a month and you actually see someone's written you a letter? I said, does it grab your attention? You know, are you interested? Does it, you know, speak to you? And all their eyes are like saucers. They say, yeah, we love that. We love it. I say, well, so why are you sort of wasting your time trying to come up with unique keywords for Indeed when all you need to do is network and figure out who you need to write a letter to and buy a stamp, address it, put it in the mailbox, and then maybe you'll get something back. And you know, they look at me like I'm nuts. They just say, oh my God. And then I tell them the story, very quick story, about how after Frank Gifford and my networking and stuff, one of the producers at ABC Sports introduced me to the guy who hires at Sports Illustrated. I'm thrilled. I mean, I think this is great. I think we have a great interview. I'm really, really thinking this is what I want. And I get the rejection letter. They used to type them out. They'd send them to your home address. There was a stamp on it. So I put it up next to my mirror so I would see it every morning. And I kept going out and doing, I was working, by the way, as a secretary to support myself for Harper's Bazaar magazine, a fashion magazine. Can you believe it? Okay. All right. So what happens is I still am with ABC, right? Because I'm just doing gopher work, $25 a day, and they put me with a producer, director, broadcaster, et cetera. So I'm out at US Open at Mamaroneck Golf Course in New York. And I get a postcard from Mamaroneck, and I write a postcard to the guy who didn't hire me. And I say, get a stamp, right? Send it to him. I say, hi, I'm out working at the US Open. I'm in the 18th broadcast booth with Henry Longhurst. It's fabulous. And then, you know, next week I might be at Forest Hills, or I might be somewhere else. Keep sending him postcards. Just postcards from wherever I was. And I never made anything up because it was exciting. I was doing all these things. And you know what? This is where they really pay attention. I said 3 months later, he called me. We had another interview, and I got hired.
Yay, let's go, the postcard lady.
So what I would say is what my neighbor in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Senator Elizabeth Warren, was accused of doing. Remember? They said she persisted.
Right, right. That's right. That was an insult.
There you go.
That was allegedly an insult.
So it's over to you.
It was a great tribute. Well, I get asked this a lot by young women and men, but let's focus on young women who want to go into politics. And it is interesting because now there are a lot of young people who would like to get into politics, but they're worried about things I never really worried about. You know, they're worried about how to maneuver social media. I hate to keep mentioning that.
I think that's
but
right.
It
Yeah,
is.
it's a big
it
elephant.
is such a difference than when I first ran for the Senate 25 years ago. And so part of it is you have to know why you want to run. I mean, what is it that is motivating you? And what is driving you? Do you have an issue you care about? Have you had an experience that has motivated you? You really need to know your why. Why would you put yourself out there? Because it's really, really hard. It's always been hard. But with social media, it is, you know, you're so much more exposed. And if people are after you, they are attacking you and threatening you. And it's just a tough decision to make. So you have to know why you're doing this. And it has to be bigger than I think I'd enjoy it or I think it would be great. You have to know what it is you want to accomplish. And then you have to know how to do it. And you have to really study campaigning, maybe work on a campaign, work for somebody in elected office, see what the job is. Make sure you really want to do the job, even if you're motivated. If you're, you know, maybe you're motivated by, you know, wanting to put more money into medical research. Isn't that a novel idea? And, you know, something we need to be doing. But maybe you could do that in a not-for-profit area, or maybe you could end up in a medical setting. But so if you want to do that through public life, through either an appointed position or an elected one, you have to know how to do it. And so it's like anything else in life. It helps to, you know, study it, learn about it, get prepared. And then you have to be really ready to accept that no matter what you do, you're going to be criticized.
That's right.
It does not matter. And I learned long ago to take criticism seriously, but not personally. So you can learn things from your critics. Actually, sometimes your critics will critique you in a way that opens your eyes, that your friends, your supporters, your staff never thought of or didn't want to say. So you can actually learn things from criticism, but a lot of it especially now, is not particularly helpful.
Right.
It's just tearing you down. It's just going after you. It's trying to get inside your head. So don't take it personally. Learn what you can from it, but don't let it, tear you apart. So I kind of go through all of that and encourage, people who are really bit by the bug to do their homework and see if it's something that they want to get into the arena with all that comes with that, all of the the attacks. And I love to quote Eleanor Roosevelt, who said, "If you want to get into politics, you need to grow skin as thick as the hide of a rhinoceros."
That's
and
right.
so
Yeah.
you do have to be toughened up enough so that you're not going to be knocked off course and destroyed by getting into the arena, but not so much that you don't feel what is happening to the people around you. You lose your empathy, you lose your ability to connect. So just basically that kind of.
It's so interesting you talked about that, because I think that at the age that I went through this and with the lack of preparation that I had for it, being 26, 27, I made some huge mistakes in my own life, in my personal life, that I made as a result of taking it personally and letting the emotions. And I often talk about that hide, and I get a sense that mine was never tough enough because things really went inside of me, and they stayed there. And I made decisions about my life. In fact, I said yes to a marriage proposal that came after 3 weeks of dating a man, because I looked at it and I thought, this is a safety net. I'm looked at in the press as this young, I was thin then, I had blonde hair, I was single. That was a lot of what people were building their stereotypes off of, and I sort of felt like if I was a married woman, things might be different. I wasn't wrong in that assumption, because soon after the case came down, the order came down, Mike Lupica, who was a columnist then and remains sort of engaged in columns, came to see me that afternoon. He wrote a column which was on the back page, and in it he referred to me by a name I didn't refer to myself as, which was Mrs. Lincoln, because that was my husband's name, not my name. And he told me, he began the first paragraph with a lovely paragraph about Miss Lincoln. Miss Lincoln decided to stay home from the game tonight to cook her husband dinner, etc. So suddenly I was a very different, unthreatening kind of person. And that the only reason that I stayed home was not to cook my husband dinner, that was for sure. But the reason I stayed home is because I knew that first night would be a media circus.
Right.
And I knew that I did not want to be a part of that media circus, because my reason for being in that clubhouse was not to ask the players what they thought about me being there, as the women who were sent up that night who had never been at a baseball game and wouldn't be at another one. But my job was to be there when no one was there with the cameras to do a story about my fight to get in there. And so I stayed home. But I tell you, I learned a lot by just that first paragraph of how the perception changes so much and the lack of fear that they may have of you. That marriage was a terrible idea. I lost friends over it. We were divorced soon after. But that was done because I didn't understand what you just said, which is that not to take it personally, but it's really something that's about the situation. But we're going to have more fun right now.
Okay.
Just for a moment.
Okay.
And then we're going to close. So, I just want to say that, I'm incredibly honored and I'm grateful to have you here. And it's because you're such a great friend that you are here. Because you said early on when I set out to write this book that you'd try to help me in whatever way you could, and you wrote a wonderful blurb for the book, and tonight we're sitting here doing this. So I thank you for those years of friendship and what you did. So in 1995, you and I celebrated your birthday in a hoedown in the White House.
Did we call it a hoedown?
They called it a hoedown.
Oh my, okay.
And I was just glad that when I packed to go to the White House for a brief time, that I had packed my blue overalls, because I didn't know there was going to be a hoedown birthday for you. But it was very fortunate. They brought the tractors in, the bales of hay, the country band, and the rest. So here I am tonight, And it's 2 days after your birthday.
Yes, right.
And so tonight, on behalf of the 92nd Street Y, this is your 14th visit here, I might add, and they wanted to make sure that we mark this occasion. So they've conspired with me. And they want me, of all people, to start singing a particular song.
You do not have to do this.
I'm not going to start singing unless the rest do. So everyone, let's
my
hear
gosh.
it. Happy birthday to you.
Oh my gosh. Look at
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Hillary. Happy birthday to you.
Oh. I think we have enough for a piece for everybody. I thought we were going to throw up on the big screen the picture of you and me from my White House birthday.
Well, we could, but they don't have it.
In
but it's a hoedown. You were in a Dolly Parton
I was in a
wig.
Dolly Parton outfit.
And yeah, she was she was in a Dolly Parton wig. Her husband was wearing a big cowboy hat and a checkered shirt. And I just happened to pack blue overalls to come to the White House. So I was in that, and you and I were leaning up against each other, and it's like I'm with Dolly. I mean, it was just quite an evening. But,
yeah, it was one of the highlights of my life.
It was pretty cool. Anyway, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.